Am I the a-hole for not letting Karen and her friends leave without paying her $8,000 bill after she claimed to know the owner? So, this just happened last night, and I still can't believe the audacity of some people. I work as a server in a high-end restaurant known for its exclusive VIP section, which is reserved for regulars, celebrities, and those willing to drop serious cash for privacy and luxury. It's a prestigious place, and we pride ourselves on our exceptional service. Enter Karen and her friend, a pair that could only be described as the quintessential entitled customers. They walked in without a reservation, and as soon as they stepped inside, Karen started making demands. "We want the best table in the house," she declared, her voice dripping with entitlement. I politely told her that the VIP section was reserved, but she huffed and tossed her hair over her shoulder, saying, "I know the owner, and he'll be furious if I'm not treated like royalty." Now, I've heard this line 1,000 times, but she was so adamant that I went to check with my manager, who clearly didn't want to deal with any drama. After a quick conversation, he gave me the go-ahead to let them sit in the VIP section. Big mistake. Once they were settled, the chaos began. Karen and her friend ordered everything: appetizers, expensive entrees, champagne, top-shelf wine, and an array of desserts. They clearly intended to make a meal out of it. I could tell they were trying to show off, and the more they drank, the louder and more obnoxious they became. It wasn't long before Karen started snapping her fingers and raising her voice, demanding that I come over every few minutes. "This isn't what I ordered," she shrieked at one point, slamming her palm down on the table like a toddler. "I demand to speak to the manager." Meanwhile, her friend was filming the whole thing on her phone, probably to post it online later, embellishing their poor treatment. As I tried to accommodate their every whim, Karen kept reminding me how she knew the owner and how she expected everything to be perfect. Honestly, it felt like I was stuck in a never-ending nightmare. I glanced around the restaurant, and patrons were starting to take notice, rolling their eyes at the scene unfolding before them. Some looked amused, others were visibly uncomfortable. After about 2 hours of this madness, I finally brought them the check, which totaled a staggering $8,000. I set it down on the table, and Karen picked it up, glancing at the total before bursting into laughter. "Oh, I'm not paying for this," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "I told you, I know the owner, and he'd never make me pay. He always comped my meals." At that moment, a pit of dread settled in my stomach. I explained that the owner doesn't just comp meals without prior approval, especially for someone who waltzed in without a reservation. That's when Karen's face turned beet red, and she began raising her voice. "You don't know who you're messing with," she threatened. "I'll ruin your life if you don't let me leave right now. You're going to regret this." The tension in the restaurant was palpable. I could feel everyone's eyes on us, and the murmurs began. "What a piece of work," I heard someone whisper. Just then, I caught a glimpse of my manager, who was watching from a distance, clearly debating whether to intervene. Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, the door swung open, and in walked the owner. It was like a scene from a movie. Karen spotted him and practically leaped out of her chair. "Oh, thank God you're here," she shrieked, waving her arms like a madwoman. "Your staff is treating me horribly. Can you please explain to them that I don't have to pay?" The owner walked over, looking utterly bewildered. He glanced at me, then back at her, and in the most deadpan voice, he said, "I'm sorry, but who are you?" The entire restaurant erupted in laughter. Karen's face went from smug confidence to sheer disbelief in an instant. She stammered, trying to explain how they were friends from that one charity event, but the owner shook his head. "Ma'am, I have no idea who you are, and nobody eats here for free, especially someone who just barged in without a reservation." As the laughter grew louder, I could see the embarrassment washing over Karen. She looked around, trying to find support in her friend, but her friend's face was a mask of shame. People were now actively enjoying the spectacle, taking out their phones to record the scene. Feeling cornered, Karen attempted to play it off, insisting it was all a misunderstanding. "You can't do this to me. I have connections." "This isn't how you treat customers," she yelled, her voice cracking. The owner raised an eyebrow. "You can pay the bill now, or we can discuss this further at the police station," he said, his tone chillingly calm. Karen thought she was being insulted when she wasn't. So, this story comes from my sister who worked at a particular restaurant a few years back. Even now, it's one of those stories that, when she tells it, people are always in disbelief. Anyway, like most restaurants, whenever a new item is added to the menu, the staff is encouraged to do suggestive selling. Basically, they're supposed to ask customers if they'd like to try the new item. Some people are happy to sample, others politely decline, and then there are the Karens. On this particular day, the restaurant had just introduced a new ambrosia salad, and the manager wanted to push it, reminding everyone to try and sell it to customers. My sister's day was going pretty well until in walks the Karen. She was a somewhat heavy-set woman, and I only mention that because it's relevant to the wild assumptions that follow. So, Karen walks in, and my sister, being her usual polite self, seats her with a smile and hands over the menu. After taking her drink order, my sister does exactly what she was supposed to do. She suggests the new salad. "Ma'am, would you like to try our new ambrosia salad?" she asks in her sweetest voice. Little did she know, this innocent question would set off an epic Karen meltdown. The moment the words leave her mouth, Karen's eyes narrow, and she nearly spits out, "What are you trying to say? Are you calling me fat?" My sister, stunned, tries to clarify, saying, "Oh no, ma'am, I'm just letting you know about our new menu item. I ask everyone about it." But Karen's not buying it. She slams her hands on the table, practically vibrating with rage, and screeches, "I have a right to order whatever I want, and you are not going to stand here and tell me that I need a salad." At this point, her yelling was starting to draw the attention of nearby tables, and some patrons were looking around nervously. The manager, hearing the commotion, rushes over to see what's going on. Karen turns to him immediately, eyes blazing, and jabs a finger toward my sister as she accuses, "Your waitress just called me fat to my face. She told me all I should order is salad." My sister, by now looking pale and horrified, tries to explain, "Sir, I only asked if she'd like to try the new ambrosia salad. I was just trying to promote it." The manager, understanding the situation but trying to defuse things, gently says, "Ma'am, I assure you, she was only doing her job by letting you know about our new item. It's a practice we do with all our customers whenever we have something new on the menu." But Karen's having none of it. She crosses her arms and raises her voice even louder, now almost screaming, "No! She called me fat. I want the corporate number now. I'll have you all fired for this." By this point, every single person in the restaurant was watching, some even whispering and trying not to laugh at the scene unfolding before them. But Karen was too busy fuming to notice any of it. My sister tries to interject, "Ma'am, I did no such thing. I'm only here to promote the new items, as I'm told to do." Karen just glares daggers at her and points to her, as if that alone is enough to make everyone see what she's suffering through. "You don't have to cover it up. I know what you meant. Just give me the number." So, the manager, obviously annoyed by this point but still maintaining professionalism, writes down the corporate number and hands it to her. She snatches the paper, mutters a few choice insults under her breath, and storms out, muttering, "Unbelievable, fat-shaming me in front of everyone. You'll be hearing from my lawyer." Sure enough, not even an hour later, corporate called the restaurant, saying they'd received a complaint about fat-shaming. My sister was practically shaking, convinced she was about to lose her job over the whole thing. But the manager calmly explained everything to corporate, detailing Karen's outburst. Corporate was totally understanding, and they assured them they weren't in trouble. In fact, corporate even had a little laugh with them over the phone and said, "In the future, let's just, maybe be a little more selective about who we promote salads to." The whole team ended up sharing a laugh about it later, and that day became an instant legend among the staff. And the best part? They never saw Karen again. My nightmare neighbor Karen made my life hell. Until karma finally got her. Alright, Reddit, buckle up for the story of the worst person I've ever encountered in my life. For the sake of anonymity, we'll call her Karen, though, believe me, this name barely scratches the surface. Imagine every horrible quality a person could possibly have, and roll it all into one person. That was Karen, my next-door neighbor. I moved into my first house a year ago, and I was beyond excited. I'd saved up for years and finally found this small, cozy place in a quiet neighborhood. It was perfect. The day I moved in, I was feeling on top of the world. That lasted about 2 hours. That's when she showed up. Karen came stomping over to my door, not to introduce herself, but to lay down the rules. She was convinced she was the neighborhood enforcer. She told me that I wasn't allowed to park my car on the street, even though it was perfectly legal, that my lawn wasn't up to community standards, and that I'd need to repaint my house because the color didn't fit the vibe. I laughed it off, thinking she was just being quirky. But oh, she was dead serious. That was just the beginning. Within a week, she was knocking on my door every day with a new complaint. She'd complain if I left my trash bins out too long after collection, they'd been out for an hour. She'd call and leave messages on my landline if she thought my music was too loud, I barely played any. One time, I was gardening in my backyard, and she stood there, watching, taking photos of me for documentation. She said, "In case you're violating any HOA rules." For reference, there is no HOA. Just Karen. Things escalated when I adopted a dog, a sweet golden retriever named Buddy. Karen lost it. She claimed Buddy was too big for the neighborhood, that his bark, he rarely barked, was disturbing her peace. She even started filming me whenever I walked him, muttering about leash laws. She reported me to animal control 3 times, saying I was neglecting Buddy, which was, of course, a lie. Each time they visited, Buddy was perfectly healthy and well cared for, and each time, they told her to stop making false reports. But Karen couldn't stand to let it go. Then the accidents started. My garden hose was mysteriously cut one morning. My car had scratches on it. My plants were dying because someone kept pouring salt on the soil. I knew it was her, but I had no way to prove it. Still, I documented everything. I set up cameras around my house, hoping to catch her in the act. But Karen was sly. She started harassing me in ways the cameras couldn't capture. She'd blast loud music at 2 a.m., make passive-aggressive comments whenever she saw me, and even managed to convince a few other neighbors that I was a menace to the block. By now, I was honestly considering moving just to escape her. Then came the incident that changed everything. One evening, I noticed Buddy acting strangely lethargic and not his usual, energetic self. I rushed him to the vet, and they found that he'd ingested something toxic. I was horrified. I hadn't left anything dangerous out, and Buddy never ate anything off the ground. That's when I remembered Karen's weird comment earlier that week, "Maybe if you can't keep that beast under control, someone else will." That was it. I was done playing nice. I filed a police report and handed over every piece of documentation, every video, every harassing note, every animal control visit report, and every witness statement I could gather from other neighbors who'd had run-ins with her. The police took it seriously, especially the poisoning part. And here's where karma came in, big time. A couple of weeks after I filed my report, I woke up to flashing lights outside. Turns out, Karen's backyard was being searched. They found several open bags of toxic chemicals, the same kind that could have poisoned Buddy, and as it turned out, she had a history of harassing neighbors in other neighborhoods before this one. She'd even been forced to move out of her last place after someone filed a restraining order. She was arrested for animal cruelty, harassment, and a bunch of other charges. Buddy made a full recovery, and after Karen was gone, the entire neighborhood felt like a different place, peaceful, friendly, and welcoming. A few of my neighbors even came over to apologize for not believing me sooner. They'd been intimidated by her for years. Now, Karen's house is up for sale. She lost her job, apparently, her employer didn't like the charges she was facing, and she's been banned from our neighborhood for life. As for me, I still live here, and so does Buddy. We've got a new garden, a repaired car, and a community of neighbors who've all bonded over the fact that we survived Hurricane Karen. Karma finally caught up to her, and I'm just sitting here with Buddy, enjoying every quiet, peaceful moment. Am I the a-hole for refusing to give up my parking spot to Karen after she threatened to call the police? So, I had a pretty wild experience recently that I just need to share. It all started on a busy Saturday afternoon when I decided to run some errands at my local mall. You know the kind of day where everyone seems to have the same idea? The parking lot was packed, and finding a good spot was like searching for a needle in a haystack. After a good 15 minutes of circling the lot, I finally spotted a spot that looked promising. It was a little far from the entrance, but it was the last open space on my side of the lot. As I was pulling in, I noticed a car sitting with its blinker on, waiting to back into the spot right next to mine. I glanced at the driver, this middle-aged woman with a stern expression, her sunglasses perched atop her head. It screamed Karen. As I parked, she rolled down her window and yelled, "Excuse me." I was waiting for that spot. I could barely believe my ears. I had no idea she was waiting for it, and there was certainly no sign indicating that the spot was reserved for Her Royal Highness. I replied, "I'm sorry, but I didn't see you waiting for it." I figured a simple apology would smooth things over, but Karen was having none of it. "You're just going to take it from me? I have a right to that spot. You better move your car, or I'll call the police." Now, I should probably mention that I'm no stranger to confrontations. I know how to hold my ground. I calmly told her, "It's just a parking spot. I'm not going to move my car. You can find another space." The audacity of this woman was unreal. She erupted in a fit of rage, waving her arms dramatically. "You'll regret this. I know the manager of this mall. He'll side with me. You think you can just bully me out of a parking spot? I'll tell him you're harassing me." At this point, other shoppers started to notice. A couple of teenagers nearby snickered, and a few parents with kids were shaking their heads. I could feel my blood pressure rising, but I kept my cool. "Call the police if you want. It's just a parking space." Karen took out her phone and loudly declared, "I'm going to call 911 and tell them someone is threatening me over a parking spot." The laughter around us grew as other people began recording the spectacle on their phones, clearly entertained by the absurdity of it all. In a last-ditch effort to intimidate me, she leaned out of her window, finger pointing like a judge. "I'll have your license plate number. You'll be sorry when the police come." Just as she was about to hit the dial button, I heard a voice from behind me. A mall security officer had arrived, probably drawn by the commotion. He approached us, looking slightly amused. "What's going on here?" Karen turned to him, ready to launch into her sob story about how I was stealing her parking spot. But before she could say a word, I calmly explained, "I just parked here, and she's threatening to call the police over it." The officer raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical of her claims. "Ma'am, are you really going to call the police over a parking space?" he asked, his tone incredulous. Karen opened her mouth to respond, but it was clear she was losing her steam. The crowd around us began to murmur, some people even chuckling at her predicament. Seeing that the officer was siding with me, she huffed and crossed her arms, trying to regain some semblance of control. "Well, I just thought I deserved that spot. This is ridiculous." The security officer glanced at her and then at me, shaking his head. "You know, it's a public parking lot. There are no reservations for spots, and unless you can prove she's done something illegal, there's really nothing we can do here." With that, Karen's face turned a shade of crimson. Realizing she had completely embarrassed herself in front of the crowd, she muttered something under her breath and threw her hands up in frustration. "Fine. Whatever. You'll regret this." As she rolled her window up and sped off, the crowd burst into laughter and applause. I couldn't help but smile, feeling a mix of relief and satisfaction. The security officer gave me a thumbs up, and I thanked him for stepping in. Moral of the story? If you think you can throw a tantrum and threaten to call the police over something as trivial as a parking spot, you might want to rethink your strategy. Because at the end of the day, the only one who ends up embarrassed is you.